Droppable. There's nothing to
I'm
sell.
just trying to think where we
Still
use.
obscenely expensive.
I'm just trying to think where we use. We're on next to antelope or boron. There you go.
We're starting. Sharon.
Mayor, we're on air.
Okay, we are on the air, folks, and good evening. I will call the meeting to order. Would you like to join us in the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag?
Forgot to take.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So roll call
Mayor Canopa.
here.
Councilor Kellum.
Here.
Coburn.
Here.
Johnson. Here. Kupczynski.
Here.
Olson. Collins.
Here.
Thank you.
All right, and we have a shorter agenda this evening. So first on the agenda is business from the public, and I think there's a couple people that wanted to bring an item forward. And Jason, would you like to come forward?
Jason McAfee, 2380 15th Street, Albany. Good evening, Madam Mayor. Good evening, City Council. The reason I am here today is to follow up on a discussion that we had last time about taking a soil sample from the end of 15th Street that my property surrounds and my hazelnut orchard surrounds. And I had scheduled a demonstration of a very sophisticated machine that's used over in central or eastern Oregon at the Hanford site. And it is touted to be the finest technology available today. And I overstepped my bounds because I took a soil sample and sent it off to him to do a preliminary test. And I didn't realize that after our last conversation, we actually needed to vote, the City Council needed to vote on the subject to actually do the test. So I am here to request a vote to do the soil sample test at the end of 15th Street.
Okay. Do you, Mark, want to explain maybe a little bit more?
Well, this property is old city landfill property, and Mr. McAfee has an interest in potentially acquiring some of that property. I think that discussion has come before you previously for development. He can speak for himself as far as what that development is. So the question is, do we want someone going out and doing samples on the city landfill? There's potential risks involved and concerns. So.
Well, let me speak to that as well, if I may. This, again, as you recall, Mr. McAfee had a proposal to purchase some property to expand his holdings at that point. I think he wanted to build a stable or a barn or...
Indoor riding arena
Right.
and stables on the...
And my recommendation was that you not proceed in that direction for several reasons. First of all, the amount of compensation that was offered, while probably fair if one were buying bare land, is not, in my judgment, a realistic amount of compensation to compensate you for the risk you will incur in the event that you start allowing development and essentially exposure of an old city dump site. If contamination is found on the site, it's going to be largely a city responsibility to remediate. And even if you do testing, all that testing will tell you is that whatever the machinery, and I certainly lack the sophistication to validate the testing, it will tell you that whatever the test protocol was did or didn't yield anything. If at the end of the day you're not going to want to sell dump ground, and you have to realize when you have dump ground and it is fallow and there's no further action required by the state at this point, while you're not making an economic use of the ground, it's not costing you anything and it's not a liability. If you were going to make $1 million selling dump ground, then it might be worth doing investigation and taking a risk because the benefit outweighed the risk. I don't remember the amount of Mr. McAfee's proposal. What was the compensation?
Current value from the tax assessor's
And what was
office.
that, do you recall?
I don't recall. But it was actually the parking lot area, not the dump itself.
Well, as I recall, it was modest. And so if you start down the road of testing, you are starting down the road to sell a property, and if that's what you want to do, that's fine. That's a political judgment. I've simply cautioned you about the risk, and you can do whatever you think is wise.
No? Ray?
Isn't there any way to simply indemnify the city through the agreement?
No, because the indemnity would be as valid as Mr. McAfee's personal financial resources, which, with all due respect, I have no way of knowing how deep your pockets are, sir. And as soon as Mr. McAfee sells the property, he's away from it. And once you lose control of it, you lose control of it. And you can have a promise to pay, but if there's not the ability to pay, the promise is valueless.
Rich?
Is there a method that would allow his use that would not change the ownership? Could we lease it with a cover over the top or whatever, so whatever would or would not be below would not be dug into while he is using it for his purposes?
You can incur any risk you're willing to incur. You can do whatever you want. You can have whatever you want to have ordered. The use that is proposed is not allowed by the zoning, as I recall.
I believe
Because
that's
it is
correct.
open space zoning, which would not allow this use. So you'll have to amend the zoning ordinance if you're going to allow the use. And so it's a political judgment on how much risk you want to incur for the benefit you perceive.
Bill?
If I had to vote tonight, I'd vote no, but I would be more interested in getting more information, particularly when you mentioned that the area you're looking at was the old parking lot.
Yes.
If there's a way to validate that, I would think there'd be less risk than some of the other areas that were general landfill area, but again, that's just an opinion based on what we've heard tonight.
Yeah, we could do, if council wanted us to do further investigation, we could investigate, was this a parking lot? However, that's not going to guarantee, if that was generally the parking lot, when we have the records, that's not going to guarantee there isn't material there that's of concern. Another concern I have is, well, you may go do a few spot samples, and if those come back clean, that tells you that those samples are clean. It doesn't tell you that there aren't issues that you just didn't happen to grab while you were sampling, so.
And while I don't know the nature of the testing, if the testing reveals the presence of a regulated contaminant, then the burden will be on the city to remediate it. You can't just cover it back over. I don't know the nature of the testing, so I'm not saying whether or not that will be the case. But at the end of the day, you're going to spend a substantial amount of staff time and city resources for, does anyone remember what the proposed offer was before? It was under 20 grand, wasn't it?
Yeah, I don't remember I never actually got a solid answer from
I think that the
tax assessor.
assessed value was under 20,000 because it's floodplain. And it's open space, as I recall,
Yeah,
zoning.
yes, and
So it's not deemed to be
a small
currently
piece of
usable.
property.
Maybe David Martineau has a supplement there, piece of information?
No,
Sorry, another matter, beg your pardon.
But does David have any more information on what's permitted for this zoning on?
I can ask, David, we're talking about the potential, your timing is
The
fantastic.
McAfee property, down the 100-acre hazelnut orchard property. So the pole barn, the arena, is not permitted in that zoning, correct?
Yeah, that's right. Right now, in the open space zone, uses that are permitted outright include agricultural and recreational uses that don't involve the construction of new buildings. That's the way the code reads right now.
And a sort of pole barn is a part of that, would include that.
Accessory buildings can be allowed for an approved agricultural use through conditional use, but as far as the way the code defines what an accessory building is, it would be something that's subordinate to the primary building or use that's on the lot.
Okay.
And, just so everyone knows, I breed and train dressage horses. I have my whole life. And, I'm very competitive at it. My best finish internationally was 14th to acquire a spot on the U.S. Olympic team. This property was my life's dream. And being able to train in the wintertime with it doesn't need walls, it just needs a roof. And you know, it's tough standing outside all winter,
Yeah.
especially on 8 horses a day.
Yeah, I think Counselor Olson and then Counselor Johnson.
I'm really
Yeah.
sympathetic to the idea, but on the other hand, I think it's best to leave sleeping dogs lie or dangerous stuff covered. You know, you think back not too many years, we didn't care much about asbestos, or we didn't care much about other stuff. And at the same time, the city of Albany businesses have been involved in some fairly exotic stuff, and so I think you don't really know what's in that dump. And
But
I think we
the
have
actual,
to be careful about
the
digging.
preliminary test that I was talking about came back negative on the 6 points that I already had dug. I thought when we had spoken before, it was more of a instruction to go do it. I didn't realize, I was informed later that it was a vote. And a tiny bit of lead was found. Enough that you couldn't put a nursery school for children. By definition, I think it's 300 days a year, 3 hours a day in the dirt. By that criteria, it was, you know, not suitable for a nursery school for children, but for covering over with sand and essentially capping is what the floor of an arena is. It was, you know, less than what comes out of the end of your shotgun when you go bird hunting. So.
Yeah, I don't recall this. I don't know if I missed the meeting or what, but could you tell me where this property is? You say Hazelnut McAfee. I don't.
So, you know, if you
I
go
have
down to
them.
Broadway and then take 15th and go on the other side of the railroad tracks, and then it's also east of, remember the old Jimmy Shelton property many, many years ago? And then it's even east of that. I mean, I'm sorry, west of that, towards the Calapooya River.
Okay, so
If you'd like to
it's
see a map, I
in.
have
It
one.
used to be,
Yeah, that'd be great.
like, what was it? Early or mid 1950s or something, it was Bureau of Mines dumping ground. Yeah, so, your old arrow. So what were you doing? So what were you doing?
No wonder Dick doesn't want that to happen.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say what or where.
Okay, so if you go on Main, it's
The
on
only thing that-
north side. Okay, got it.
The only thing that
Thank you.
bothers me on this is, you know, there's the unknown of this property. So do we ignore this forever, and/or would the ideal thing be to someday work on getting it cleaned up? And if we ignore it, then what about, we're kind of delaying a future cleanup of the site to future councils down the road. So if we're not wanting to tackle it, but, yeah, that's the only part that really bothers me.
Just from experience with having, every place I've ever been has had a dump, an old dump that's been decommissioned, and typically once DEQ will look to determine if there's any potential hazard to the public. That's, you know, when dumps are, they'll go and they'll check them to see, they have groundwater monitoring wells. I think we have some out by the old dump out at
53rd.
Yeah, they're not currently active, but we did at
So
one
that they
time.
will monitor them to determine whether they see any signs of contamination that would pose a risk. And actually, one of the best treatments for old dumps is to do exactly what's been done here, which is just sort of cap them over, and most of the materials that are in them will degrade over time, and they don't cause a problem. The idea of disturbing them actually creates the potential for migration of contaminants, particularly when you're close to water, and that site is. So I think that's one of the reasons why Jim is pointing out that there's a risk involved, even though, and I'm sympathetic too. I think it's a neat project, and I would love for Mr. McAfee, he's been talking about it with me now for a number of years about wanting to do this. The problem is that this site, in addition to the issues of proximity to the old dump, you're dealing with issues related to land use and floodplain. And so it makes it a little more complicated. And as I think Jim would point out, the question is the public value or public benefit that you get from having done it. Because it's not you're not adding much to the tax rolls, and you're not getting a lot, in return for selling.
Well, I would argue that point. There are students that come to OSU and change where they go to school to come train with me. And when you do the branching out of economic value to that, I have 4 students right now that have changed their universities to come here, not because of OSU. And when you do the economic numbers of that, it changes the picture very drastically.
But David, can I ask, is the stable the agricultural use to which the pole barn could be accessory?
I think so. We believe we have a trajectory in the planning area that we can actually get a path towards approval.
Oh,
And
all right.
we've met with Mr. McGaffey to go over those, so there are processes in place that could lead to the outcome that he's looking for.
That's news to me.
Yeah, me too, so. Okay, so kind of the question to you was if you wanted to have the soil gone through this testing, but I'm not seeing any nods for that, but, so.
For those can of worms, I'd say no.
Yeah. Okay. Nope.
Is this the only site, either on your property or on ours, where the facility can be constructed?
It is the highest ground, so for purposes of drainage, it is by far the most desirable, and it is the closest to a large stand of trees, so for hiding a building, it's aesthetically by far the most desirable. You've seen horse facilities before. You go on and to the property, and there's the albatross of a freestanding roof. This is by far the best aesthetic and functional place to put it, and it's high ground. In the event of high water, a flood event, the difference between 2 or 3 feet higher makes a huge difference laterally in how much water is displaced over the floodplain. So just a few feet higher makes an extremely big difference in protecting things like hay. The hay storage would be the highest, and I buy hay at $30,000 a shot. So
this is in the floodplain, not the floodway?
It's in the floodway.
It's in the,
Floodplain, I think.
Floodplain.
Is it floodway?
It is floodway.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
I'm sorry, David, floodway?
Yes, sir.
And this stands, the highest point on this is 210 to 212 feet, which is as high as the railroad track. And I believe it's as high as we are right now. So I don't know how high this building is. I think this building's a 208. I'm not sure about
Well,
that.
if I hear David, I'm inferring that there may be a process by which it could go through the planning commission to make an outcome plausible. I would have no qualms about letting it do that, and if it comes through properly, then we might be able to sign off on it, but not tonight.
He wouldn't have legal status to apply for a land use action because he doesn't own or have a sales agreement on the property. You are the owner of the property. He does not have standing under the land use code.
But unless he...
Well, I'm sorry, maybe I'm
But
wrong.
unless he
Have
went
you-
on his own, he has 100 acres there, went on his own property outside of the landfill, and if it would be able to be considered an agricultural use. So,
Yeah, I'd like to
David.
add a little clarification, if I could, on 2 points. One is a no-rise study was done on the property that he was interested in looking at for his use. It was done by West Consultants about a year ago, and it indicated that there would be a no-rise if the structure were to be placed on the site, because apparently it's high enough to where it would have a negligible effect on the floodway. Secondly, there is a path towards getting approval, perhaps through the planning, but it's going to be a very arduous path. The first and foremost is successful passage of a development code amendment that would allow the use that he wants to do in the first place in the open space zone. follow that would be conditional use or some kind of a site plan review that would actually permit the use on the ground. But right now, the way the code reads, the use is not allowed in that particular zone. So that's one major hurdle that he would have to overcome.
Does he have standing to apply for that amendment?
Well, not given the ownership situation. If he proposed to put this on his own property, he would need to do another no-rise analysis to see if it could still pass the muster with regards to the floodway. If he could, then he would have standing to do it on his own property, but certainly not on the city-owned piece without some kind of a negotiation on the property.
Why don't you tell us what you want to do? I mean, again, my recommendation is, you're talking about while we all want to be sympathy to have sympathy to the desires of an individual citizen, you're having to also weigh what is in the best interest of the economic risks and so forth of the city as a whole. But if you tell us that you want to try to find a way to do it, then staff will go back and look for a way to do it. It will be against my advice from a risk analysis, but then I'm not elected. So, you do what you think is best.
I think I agree with Dick. I think that it's fine until you uncover some really bad stuff, and like you said, you can't ignore it. And it could bankrupt this city.
So you're emptying the whole dump.
And you'd be asking yourself, why in the world did we ever go down this path? I don't think that's good judgment for us.
Well, again, we are not talking about the dump, we're talking about the parking lot. And there's on site, there's a very distinct line where the ground drops off. And like I said before, I actually already did the test. I thought I was supposed to. I thought that was what I was being told to do, and it already came back negative. So,
I would like to allow something to happen. However, there are some issues for me. I mean, if at some juncture we need to check this out to make sure it's okay for us, I think it doesn't make any difference. If, on the other hand, we don't know what's under that. I mean, if you go to Coffin Butte, there are places that look like, hey, this doesn't look like this has ever been touched. And, I mean, I was there 30 years ago, and I know that great big hump there did not exist. So, I mean, what it looks like is kind of irrelevant. If a guy core drilled it or something, you might know. But going back to both Dick and Bill's position, if you don't know what you're going to get, and if it came from Bureau of Mines, and Bureau of Mines did all the stuff in the 1940s, 50s, if that's where the stuff came from at that juncture, thank Wah Chang, you don't touch that with a pole. I don't see a positive outcome.
okay, and well, from a citizen point of view,
Well,
wouldn't you want to know?
from
if
the
there's a problem there?
citizen point of view,
Because
and that was what I said before, if there is something we need to know about that,
Mhm.
we need to find out. If we don't need to know, if it ain't broke, don't fix it comes back to mind. If we see some place where it's leachate is coming out, or there is something, some indicator that there is a problem, we need to check it out.
Yeah, there is,
And that
If there is
indicator's
none,
That indicator's going to come a little late. I grow 100 acres or 50 acres of hazelnuts that go directly into human consumption.
well,
That's a bit of a head in the sand approach,
the point
isn't
is,
it?
you're
And that's aside from what I'm here asking
Yeah.
for, but that point of view,
Well, while
Seems a
that's
little
true, it's also
scary from
true
the
that
consumer's point of
you
view.
know that there is the possibility of a problem. And those are your hazelnut trees, correct?
yes.
I mean, if we don't know that there's a problem and there is no outward indication that there's a problem, unless we get paid a whole bunch of money, it doesn't look good. I mean, the chances, I wouldn't make a bet on this at a casino. And I fully understand that, you know, a dream being quashed is awful. And I would think that if there's another place, I hear your dream, and I would like to see you succeed. I don't think this is the place.
Yeah, I mean, it can be placed on another part of my property. But that issue aside, hiding from whether there is a contamination that exists in that dump that, I mean, I already know how the test came back. I already saw the results, so I already know what it is.
Well, was it,
But
realistically, was it a core drill that you did?
what this machine does is I can't give a very articulate description of it, but what they do over in Hanford with it is they have the ability to not core drill and still analyze what would come out as a core sample. And how deep it goes, I don't know, but it sounds to me like they go down about 10 feet and maybe more. I'd ask the person who actually runs it.
I understand.
And I can get you the results of it. But.
Yeah, I was just wondering, when you say you only want the parking lot part of it.
Correct.
How many acres is the whole city property?
Just over 4.
Just over 4. And so the parking lot part of it is?
Maybe 3/4 of an acre.
Would it make any difference if, let's say, you did a segregation of property and only did that? Would that make a difference?
Well,
I mean, if he's...
That's precisely what we were talking about doing.
That's what he's wanted.
Yeah. There was no intention of me ever taking the portion where the garbage is actually dumped. That has to stay in the city to stay protected, so 3 generations from now, it still can't be disturbed.
Yeah.
That's...
Forgive me, because this is the first I've heard of it. So, yeah, I don't know.
And I don't know, maybe we have surveys that show precisely where the parking lot boundaries are. Maybe we have detailed knowledge of exactly what went on in the parking lot. When was this dump closed?
52.
50s.
So, what, over 60 years ago.
Before 53rd was over.
So I don't think we can say with confidence that this is only the parking lot. I mean, we can say it's where you believe the parking lot was. Maybe we believe the parking lot was. That's the kind of thing you do testing. If we were going to buy this property, if the city of Albany was going to buy this dirt and take over responsibility if there's contamination, we would have significant underground testing done before we take it over. And there would be arguments about whether the prior owner retained risk or the city did. The thing to remember is, we're not talking about denying Mr. McAfee opportunities to do whatever his dream is on his property. We're talking about not proposing to sell him dump ground property, which was intended to be a dump forever, which is not allowed for the development he proposes under your land use regulations, and for which the compensation would be nominal when compared to the potential risk. And so, you know, you can say you want, on the flip side, you could say, well, it's fallow now, it's not having any economic use, and this is an economic use. And that's the judgment call on balancing the risk. But understand, because I don't want somebody in the audience who tunes in late to think that this is the city council denying somebody a right to use their property. It's the city council worrying about deciding whether or not they want to start into negotiations to sell him city property for a use that's not currently allowed by city law.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I don't remember going to that dump, so I think it probably closed prior to 1966. But I do remember going to the 53rd Street dump. And that was a fairly relaxed operation. You could go and you could kind of dump and you could pick around and stuff and you can look at this and that and see puddles of funny-looking stuff. And I, again, say, I think we need to leave the sleeping dogs lie. Sorry.
Okay. Well, thank you for giving me your time.
So Jason, maybe still, meet with David and just see on, without the city portion of property, what would the process be, if there can be a process to be able to see about getting the arena in. So maybe just chat with David and touch base
Precisely.
with him. Okay, all right.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Jason.
City Council, thank you.
Okay, business from the public, and Susan, you had an item you wanted to bring forward?
Let's see who this lady is.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and Council. My name is Susan Keen, Keen. I live at 507 Southeast 4th Avenue. At the last City Council meeting, I shared personal testimony. I introduced myself by saying, I have lived in Albany for 7 years. Prior to moving to Albany, I lived in Salem for 20 years. During the 2006 Oregon primary election, I was a candidate for the House of Representatives in District 25. At the end of my testimony, I shared my personal fears. That was on September 10th. Something happened 3 days later. A Benton County Sheriff's deputy came to my home and told me I was under arrest. He did not ask me for identification, and he never told me what I was charged with. He drove me to Corvallis, where I was booked and released. So my fears are justified. But there's more to this story. I hope someone's keeping a timeline. On September 3rd, 2009, I filed a small claims case in Lynn County against the then Chief of Police, Ed Boyd, for actions committed by his police department that I had deemed unlawful. That's when I met City Attorney Delapoire and City Manager Wes Hare. They told me my basis for a small claims was not justified, and they stopped the action. Approximately 1 year later, I filed a second small claims against Police Chief Ed Boyd because I received what I perceived as retaliation from the police department. The city leaders stopped the action again. So I filed a formal civil complaint 3 weeks later without the assistance of an attorney. Long story short, the civil complaint got a court date in March of 2011. Judge James Egan, along with the Eugene attorney Robert Ford, determined I had a tort claim. Judge Egan told me I had a legitimate lawsuit and suggested I find an attorney. I could not find an attorney in Albany that would even consider representing me in a formal lawsuit. So out of fear of further retaliation, I dropped the case. Well, here we are 3 weeks later, 3 years later. Here we are 3 years later, and I am still receiving retaliation. I don't know what to do. The home I've been living in for 3 years is being sold, and I imagine I'll be evicted somewhere around the end of November or the 1st of December. I'm really hoping someone might have a question or two because I have many.
The only thing I had, could you repeat what you had said that after 2 weeks ago, when was the Benton County deputy there that said they arrested you? When did that take place?
Madam Mayor, I provided testimony September 10th.
Right.
On
so-
Saturday, September 13th, a Benton County Sheriff's deputy came to my home and arrested me. He didn't ask for identification. He didn't tell me what I was charged for. He drove me solitarily to the Corvallis jail. I was booked and released. It doesn't end. So Friday, I have investors looking in my apartment for the highest bidder and a court date in Benton County.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that for me. Okay, all right. Any questions? No? Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you. Thank you
Good
for your
evening.
concern. Yeah, thank you, Susan. All right, anyone else from business from the public? Okay, not seeing anyone. Okay, council, we have kind of a carryover from an ordinance. This was from 2 weeks ago. The first item, B1, and you've already taken that was the one that we had voted, but we didn't end up having enough of we were missing one counselor, So, Jeff, I think you wanted to kind of update the council on some more information?
Evening, Mayor, Council. We don't have a presentation tonight about our proposed program. We covered that at the last public hearing on the 10th. But I did want to discuss for a moment the memo that I provided you yesterday via email and that you should have in front of you tonight on a light blue colored sheet of paper. Based on some confusion regarding the proposed permit fees at the last public hearing and in a recent letter to the editor, the mayor requested that I provide some clarification on both the permit fees and also the anticipated construction costs for stormwater quality facilities to be incorporated into developments. And I'll just touch on a few points in the memo, and then if council has any questions of either myself or Lori, who you know has helped us develop the program, we'll be happy to try to answer those. So the first item that touched on in that memo was the permit fees. Provided a couple sample fee calculations. Those are based on completely hypothetical developments. These were made on some simplifying assumptions, and it's important to understand that every development proposal is different, and consequently every development proposal has a different set of fees. These are just intended to give you a feel for the order of magnitude that we're talking about for the permit fees. Much of the discussion at the last meeting wasn't about those base fees themselves, but was rather about two fees listed under the other fee section on the rate resolution. And they're there to support program elements that we've discussed several times in the proposed municipal code amendments. The first one was for transferring responsibility to the city for planting and establishing vegetation. The important thing to note here on this one is that whether or not a developer wants to pursue that option is entirely up to the developer. There is no requirement for them to participate in that program. Likewise, there is no requirement for the city to accept that obligation. So it has to work for the developer, it has to work for the city. It's just some flexibility added to the program that we think will provide meaningful benefit for the developers. The second one, and probably the one that received the most discussion, was the off-site post-construction stormwater quality fee. This is part of the program that's here to provide a solution to allow a developer to move forward with a project even if their site won't support stormwater quality facilities. So examples of where this might be used are for zero lot line buildings or sites that have existing developments that constrain the proposed development. So rather than losing buildable area to accommodate construction of stormwater quality facilities, they can pay this fee if they want to, and the city will construct compensating facilities elsewhere in the city. Similarly, if a site has certain types of contaminated soil, they're in a landslide-prone area, such that facilities couldn't be constructed safely on site, they can use this off-site route by paying the fee to the city, and so then rather than us having to deny a land use application, there's an avenue for that development to still move forward through this part of the program. This approach would be used in very few developments. DEQ will not allow agencies to just let developers pay a fee in lieu of constructing facilities just because they want to. It has to be justified. So this part of the program and the associated fee would be used very infrequently. That's it for the permit fees. Construction costs, we also provide some construction cost estimates for a developer to install stormwater quality facilities with their developments. I want to clarify, these are not fees paid to the city. These are construction cost estimates to construct the improvements as part of their development. We provided two examples. One was for a single-family residential subdivision at around $3,000 per lot. Another was for a 1-acre commercial development, 85% of the lot covered with impervious surfaces, where we estimated that the additional cost could be around $18,000. And I want to touch on these numbers because I want to make sure that we are not unintentionally misleading council in any way. So first, we're providing these numbers to give council a feel for the order of magnitude that we're talking about. The costs are going to vary between developments based on how each developer chooses to develop their site and the types of stormwater quality facilities that they choose to install or construct. Other factors like local construction market at the time of bid, inflation over time, and other things are all going to influence those values over time. So again, when Lori and I looked at this with a very simplistic approach to provide you with just a gauge as to the magnitude of what we're talking about. So we do not believe we are looking at least cost options running in the $10,000 per single-family residential lot or $50,000 for a 1-acre commercial development. We believe we're more in the range of what we're talking about there in the memo. So again, it's just a gauge. Last thing I wanted to remind council of was that we have a lot of flexibility built into our proposed program for the developer. This should promote some ingenuity over time and reduce costs, especially on the non-residential side. In one of our past meetings, I shared an example of a subdivision, the one that recently received approval on the old Henshaw Farms site. The developer had a requirement from the state to install stormwater quality facilities. The developer wanted them to be public, but their proposal was very different from what we have in our proposed program. We reviewed it with the developer's engineer, and we determined that we thought it would work fine. So it was a win-win because it represented the least cost alternative for the developer. It met the intent of our program, and it didn't, and the proposal didn't present additional maintenance cost concerns for us in the long term. So this type of flexibility is built into our program so that we can take advantage of that ingenuity and alternate proposals moving forward. So in all that, the main point I want to make with all of this is just to say that the costs we provided are order of magnitude estimates. They are not detailed construction cost estimates, just trying to give you a gauge. And so I want to just make sure that's clear because I do not want to mislead anybody. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have about the proposed fees or the program in general. And Lori's here to help answer questions as well, if you have any.
Bessie?
Jeff, and thank you for the clarification. That really helped. Can you pretty much assure that there are not overlapping and double fees in here with, like, the development costs plus the stormwater costs, that the fees they pay when they're going for their site plans and all that stuff, and then the stormwater afterwards? Is there any overlapping of the fees or anything, or double?
No, there's no overlapping of the fees. For public infrastructure, as many of these will be, there's no fees related with land use applications for us to review those. Those are done, Public Works does those at no cost. We have specifically created this program to run in parallel with our SI permit whenever it can. And that's why those base fees are structured the way that they are. And so those will be combined into one. The calculations are the same, so they're not double accounted. There's no intention to double account for any fees.
Jeff, maybe I could jump in too. So if a developer's coming in with a proposal, there are fees associated with land use approvals. They pay those at the time of application to community development. There is no proposal to increase those fees to accommodate our review of storm drainage. The storm drainage fees only come into play when they actually apply for a permit to go build something. So I hope that clarifies that, and that there's not an overlap between planning fees and these stormwater fees.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Rich.
Is there any overlap between water, sewer, and storm drainage fees? I mean, I recognize they're under different auspices, but, I mean, it seems to me when you build something, you're doing construction, you have a backhoe there, you are doing all the work that you can do. I mean, if I'm digging a water line and a sewer line and a line for the power and then drainage, it's all at the same time. So realistically, I would be ready to have something inspected all at the same time. Or it would be in groups. I mean, if you're talking about a whole lot of places, it would be in groups, so it's not going to be, as I'm understanding, you have different people inspecting water sewer than would inspect storm drain? Is that an erroneous assumption on my part?
We utilize we have a very talented inspection group, first off, and they have a vast understanding of all the utilities. So we utilize, when it's public infrastructure, we utilize the same inspectors to cover all of our utilities. In short, to answer your question, no, there's not overlap in the fees charged for the design review or the construction inspection. If you look at the resolution, which is on page 76, the fees that are charged are based on a percentage of the estimated construction cost. So the more utilities that they are constructing with a project, the higher their construction cost is going to be, and therefore the higher the fee that they would pay for those design review and construction inspection services would be.
So it is a total not broken out individually. I mean, well, it may be broken out individually, but I mean, it's a total not having to do with the fact that you're doing storm drain. It's $84,000 of this and $23,000 of that, and the total is what the total is.
We don't track our inspections that way. When we take the fees in, there's an accounting of what's the construction cost estimate for streets, waters, and storms. So those fees and revenues go into the appropriate bucket in the budget.
And so if it's the same people basically doing those inspections.
It's the same people. They will now have added items that they have to cover for their inspections that may or may not align with other activities. And clearly the design review process for reviewing the engineering plans, it can be submitted on the same set of plans, but it is an entirely different task to review that versus the other utilities on the proposal.
And when we are looking at fees, this is basically a reimbursement, is that correct? For actual amount of time over average used?
That is the general, we don't do a specific reimbursement, but that is the idea, is that these fees are structured to reimburse us for our time for plan review and then also construction inspection. Obviously, some projects are, if you want to call them winners, and some are losers, but...
How often do we make sure we're on target?
The last time I looked at that, I mean, honestly, we haven't had a whole lot of private development in the last several years, and so the last time I looked at that was back when we were having mid-30s to 40 private developments a year. And in aggregate, between the two fees, the drawing review and the construction inspection, vary win-lose, win-lose, win-lose. But when you look at the big group of it, we were right in the mix for covering our costs.
Okay, thank you.
Chrissy?
I have one other question. Because it was brought up in the media, where do the fees go? Into which fund?
So the base fees, the drawing review fee and the permit to construct the facilities go into, those are our fees related to constructing public infrastructure. So those revenues, based on the utilities that we're reviewing, go into those specific utilities' revenues.
Okay.
So if we're reviewing if they're building a street and they pay a construction permit for a street project and there's no other utilities that involve, all of the revenue goes into the street budget.
Yeah, because it was brought up that we're doing this in order to finance some pet projects and stuff, and so I just wanted to, people watching, it does go into designated funds. It's not that we can just put it in the general funds and use it otherwise, so I just wanted to make that clear. Thank you.
All right, any other questions? Okay, so council, the ordinance is on page 3, so we would just need a motion for that ordinance.
I move we adopt the ordinance on page 3.
There's been a motion and a second. Any more discussion? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign.
Aye.
Aye.
Roll call.
Kellum,
No.
Coburn,
No.
Johnson,
No.
Kopsinski,
Yes.
Olson,
Yes.
Collins.
Yes.
Okay, that's time. All right, and I will vote yes. Okay, all right, glad to get this project kept moving forward, so I think this will be great for Albany. Okay, with that, the motion's carried. Next, council, you have the next ordinance, which is, this one would be for the Albany Development Code and Zoning Map. This is the ordinance that's on page 11.
Move adoption of the ordinance on page 11.
Second.
All right, and any more discussion? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay,
Nine.
let's see, was that 4-2?
That's close. Aye.
Okay. Yeah, okay. All right, and that motion, whoops, just a sec, I have to read a little script here. A legislative decision of the City Council may be appealed to the Land Use Board of Appeals by filing a notice of intent to appeal not later than 21 days after the decision becomes final. Within 5 working days following adoption of an amendment or new land use regulation, the Director shall forward to the Department of Land Conservation and Development a copy of the adopted text and findings and notify the Department of any substantial changes which may have occurred in the proposal since any previous notification to the Department. All right, and with that, next is item C. This is adoption of the resolution, and this is on page 75. This is for the permit fees.
Move for adoption of the resolution.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, let's do roll call on that. I think it was 3-3.
Kellum,
No.
Coburn,
No.
Johnson.
No.
Kopsinski,
Yes.
Olson,
Yes.
Collins.
Yes.
Okay, and that'll be a yes. So 4-3, motion carries. Okay, all right, okay, thank you, all the work, and thank you, Lori, too. So thank you for all your hard work on this project. Okay, next is adoption of the consent calendar, and I'll entertain a motion for approval unless there's an item that you'd like to have pulled off for discussion.
Move for adoption of the consent calendar.
Just a
Right.
second.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay, motion carried. The consent calendar's all passed. Okay, next is award of bid, and this is the Vine Street Water Treatment Plant Bank Repair. This is on page 91. And Mark, did you have anything to say on this?
I'm going to let Stacy Belcastro, our engineering manager, give you report on this project. It was not a funded or anticipated project.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and council members. My name is Stacy Belcastro, and I'm an engineer with the Public Works Department. So before you is a recommendation to award a contract for a bank repair located adjacent to the Vine Street Water Treatment Plant to Tornado Soft Excavation. So following up on what Mark said, this project is an emergency bank repair, and it's located adjacent to the Vine Water Treatment Plant. It wasn't identified in this year's budget because it happened unexpectedly. We had a 40-foot-long bank failure occur on the west bank of the canal, right next to the water treatment plant, where we have our access, where we get deliveries of our chemicals, and we also have some utilities located underneath that road as well. Although the project was not planned in this year's budget, there are funds in the water capital fund reserves to cover the cost of the project. This bank failure is representative of a number of bank failures that have happened along the canal. In fact, there's been 3 bank failures that have occurred between 3rd and 4th Avenue next to the Vine Street Water Treatment Plant. And the improvements that will occur with this project, they'll provide a long-term fix so that we can protect the integrity of the banks there and hopefully not have any more future failures. The lower reaches of the canal between 3rd Avenue and 9th Avenue are characterized with steep walls, and the retaining system that holds them up is timber boards, steel pile, and then timber struts. And so these bank failures do occur occasionally. Next to the Vine Street Water Treatment Plant, it's relatively more steeper than the other areas, and I think that's why we've seen more there in recent years. The project's going to include installation of drilled-in soldier piles with earth anchors to hold them back to protect against overturning, and then there will be concrete panels below the water surface, and then cedar boards will be placed above the water surface. And I'd be happy to answer any questions if council or the mayor has any questions.
Right, yeah, Bill and then Dick.
So I'm just looking at the cost. I mean, over 50% over engineer's estimate. Are there some concerns there?
There was, and I think, it is a very unique project. A design consultant provided the structural design, and then they also determined the estimate, but even then, it was a hard target to hit. The site conditions are very difficult. There's limited space for the equipment. We have overhead power lines that the contractors are going to have to work around, and then with all that, the work's going to be taking place in the water for a good portion of the project. We did have a mandatory pre-bid meeting that all the contractors attended, and so they are aware of the site conditions. We've talked with the contractors and the design consultant and have had subsequent site meetings with the power company and the contractor after opening the bids. So we do think that the costs, the bids that were submitted, are representative of how much the project's going to cost to construct.
So due to this uniqueness and some of the challenges you mentioned, was there any pre-qualification process for these contractors on this project?
We did not do a pre-qualification process, but I think with having the mandatory bid meeting, you have a chance to spend time with the contractors. Our design consultant was familiar with all the contractors that submitted bids, and they did not have any concerns.
And I assume the low bidder listed as subcontractors? Or were there any?
They're required to. I don't know that, I can't recall who, if they did list a subcontractor for the work.
And would you know, probably wouldn't know the percentage of work that they were proposing to sub out?
I don't have that information with me.
Okay, thank you.
I think Dick and then Ray.
Yeah, our consultant, George Crandall, has suggested that the Vine Street Canal could be an amenity rather than just a ditch. And do you consider that in this design? Is this a relatively permanent fix on the canal, or is this something to hold it until we can do something that I would think would be more appropriate with our canal?
It is a long-term fix. We were required to go through a consultation with the Oregon State Historical Office to approve the design, just to make sure that aesthetically it didn't change the historical look of the canal. And that's one of the reasons why there's concrete panels below the water surface, and above there'll be the cedar panels that we see now.
Well, Kara hasn't considered doing a, let's see, Floyd's smiling here, he probably knows the problems involved. Considered doing something Crandall-wise with it, but I'm wondering if perhaps it should be considered before we do a fairly expensive fix for this short piece of canal.
I think because of the issue with the canal, the bank stability next to our treatment plant, we feel it's important to move forward with this process now rather than waiting for a potential discussion on Kara. I don't believe anything we're doing here would preclude us from doing other improvements that the Kara board might envision on the canal. You might say that some of the work is, throwaway work, but because of the nature of the failure and the location, we don't really have the ability to wait. We're not comfortable waiting on the process. Otherwise, we would have taken it through our normal budget and CIP process.
I'd hate to see us spend this kind of money and then tear it up in a few years to do something more appropriate.
This is just kind of anecdotal. Even though there was a limited number of bidders, from my perspective, it was refreshing to see that two-thirds of the bidders were from Albany. Sometimes that's not the case.
Any other questions? All right, with that, I'll entertain a motion.
Move for approval of the bid.
Second. Is there a second? Was that a second, Bessie?
Yes.
Okay, there was a second. Any more discussion? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay, motion carried. All right, thank you, Stacy. And next, this is the financial participation for construction of the Corvallis-Albany Trail Project. This is on page 95 to 99. Wes, did you want to lead off on this one? Or
Well, I would just say that was a misprint. That's the Albany to Corvallis.
That's right, yes.
let's make sure from now on, we always have to all the
And I'll turn it over tomorrow.
So this is a portion of the path inside the City of Albany limits. You heard on Monday that Benton County also has some funding for additional pathway construction west of the city limits. And the city's contribution here, we're asking for, or the county is asking for, our participation of not to exceed $304,000. That is the same amount that was authorized in our grant application back in, I can't remember, I think it was 2012 or 13. Albany submitted a grant application for this exact project that was unsuccessful. Benton County was encouraged to submit a duplicate application to a different pot of money, and they were successful. So they're just asking for us to recommit our funds to that project, which we had previously indicated we would commit to.
Where's the money coming from?
System development charges. It's in our transportation system development plan, and the funding is identified there.
I just have however good this is, I just find it a little strange that we're making a trail before we fix the road. And that has nothing to do with what we're doing. It has everything to do with what ODOT is doing, and I understand that, but no one has been killed on the bike path, and there have been several people killed on the road. I'm going to vote for it, but it's just a frustration of mine.
Yeah, well, hopefully the bike path will be able to at least make it safer for some folks and some modes of transportation, so, other modes, yeah. Bessie?
Yeah, I can't remember Monday if Benton County says they will. It does say in here, Benton County has indicated they could contribute up to 100,000. I just wondered, is that could, did it become a will or shall?
Yeah,
Monday?
their contribution is 100,000 to this, and
Okay.
they've also contributed to the project previously in doing the right-of-way analysis for much of the path, much of the environmental work. They had received some other grants in which they participated in, so, but they have committed to the 100,000 additional match for this section.
Good. Thank you.
Right. Okay, council, on page 95, there is a recommended motion.
Just a point of clarification, on page 95, it says 304. On page 97, it identifies city match as 304,500.
Thank you, that's a good catch.
First one on action requested also says, 304.
As I look back to what was approved back in December of 2012, it was the 304,500. So that is a misprint, and I apologize for not catching that on the recommended action.
I would move the requested action with clarification of the number.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay, motion carried. All right, thank you, Mark. Next, business from the council. So Bessie, anything this evening?
Well, I'm leaving for the LOC conference tomorrow, and you've given me the right to vote, and I guess everyone's going to be okay with, I don't even know what's going to be voted on, and so I'll do my best. It might be a little personal, but, if this is the way I think, I'll figure that you guys are thinking that way too. So I don't know what they're voting on, so it's kind of hard to say I'll go this way or whatever, but I'll do my best.
Wes and I will be there tomorrow too, and maybe they might already be bringing it up, what resolutions there are.
Yeah,
so.
and then we can discuss it,
Yeah,
exactly.
we can connect, so.
Oh, I won't be there till.
Before I voted against it.
Or what time are you going tomorrow?
Not until evening, Larry's got to work all day.
Oh, okay. We'll be there early morning. Yeah. Okay, all right, Dale?
Early morning.
Nothing tonight, thank you.
Okay, Dick?
I will be absent next work session and the next city council meeting.
Okay.
I will, the guys that I'm talking with.
So the next two then, the next work session
Work
and-
session and council meeting.
Okay, okay. All right, Ray? Okay. And Rich?
Stop smirking. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Jim and Ray. Happy birthday to you. You're really old.
That's good.
That's too funny.
Mine? It's November 2nd.
It's the day after my husband's.
Written that down right now.
Hey, if you're going to sing happy birthday to me, I only ask one thing. Sing it on key.
You'll have to lead your own.
Okay. Was there anything else, Rich? That was it?
Gosh, isn't that enough?
Yes. Okay. And I didn't have anything this evening. And then Wes, anything?
I was able to go to the ISMA conference this past week. Came back with some good ideas, I think, for our budget process this year that I hope I'll be able to apply to our meeting that we have scheduled in November. Just another way of reminding everybody that, we had talked during the budget process of having a November meeting this year, and we are planning to proceed with that.
Good.
Okay. Great. Staff, have anything else? Oh, all right. So with that, we have our work session is September 29th, and next regular session is October 8th. With that, we are adjourned.